The spaceship shuddered as alarms blared across the cockpit. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a harsh red glow over the control panel. Inside, a lone figure, a warrior of unmatched skill, gripped the controls with clenched fists. She was being exiled, sent away from her home planet, her people, and everything she had ever known. The authorities had decided that she was too dangerous, too unpredictable. They had given her no choice but to leave, to crash land on a planet no one had dared to explore for centuries. As the ship spiraled through space, she fought to regain control. But the damage was too great. Her ship tore through the atmosphere, flames licking the sides as it plunged toward the surface below. A final, violent jolt sent her body crashing against the harness holding her in place. Everything went black. When she regained consciousness, it was the silence that struck her first. The roar of the ship's engines was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Her vision was blurry, and her head throbbed with pain, but she forced herself to focus. Slowly, she unclipped the harness and stumbled out of the wreckage. Her legs felt weak, but she steadied herself, taking in her surroundings. The sky above was a deep, cloudless blue, but the air felt strange, thick and humid, as if she had stepped into a world that didn't belong in this universe. She coughed, her throat dry. The world around her was unfamiliar. The landscape was barren, rocky, and desolate, but in the distance, strange shadows seemed to move, shifting in ways that defied logic. Her instincts kicked in, warning her that she wasn't alone. She wasn't sure what was out there, but she could feel it. Something was watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the unease, but she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was close. She forced herself to assess the situation. The wreckage of her ship was scattered around her, the twisted metal gleaming in the harsh light. There was no sign of any other survivors. She had been alone when the crash happened, and it seemed that no one else had made it out. But there was no time to mourn. Her mind snapped back to the present, and she knew that the first thing she had to do was survive. Moving cautiously, she made her way toward the remains of the ship. Her legs were shaky, and every step felt heavy. The wreckage was strewn across a wide area, pieces of metal and machinery scattered like a broken puzzle. She knew she had to find something useful: tools, supplies, anything that could help her. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the debris, her breath shallow and quick, her senses on high alert. Suddenly, she heard it. A low growl, barely audible over the sound of the wind. She froze. Her heart raced as she scanned the horizon, her eyes darting back and forth. The growl was distant, but it was unmistakable. Something was out there, lurking in the shadows. Her fingers tightened around a sharp piece of metal, her only weapon. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew she had to be ready. The ground beneath her shifted, and she stumbled back, nearly falling. A strange, rustling sound filled the air, as if something large was moving through the brush nearby. Her body tensed, every muscle screaming for her to run, to hide, but she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to know what she was up against. In the distance, a figure appeared. At first, she thought it was a mirage, some trick of the heat. But as it drew closer, her blood ran cold. It wasn't a human, nor any creature she had ever seen. Its skin was a dark, mottled gray, its eyes glowing with an unnatural yellow light. It moved with terrifying speed, its limbs long and jointed in strange ways, like a spider. It stopped just beyond the wreckage, its head tilting as it regarded her with cold, calculating eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but it was dangerous. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Her mind raced, calculating her options. She was unarmed, her ship was destroyed, and she had no idea where she was. But one thing was clear: this planet was not the lifeless, empty world she had hoped it would be. It was alive. It was dangerous. And she was the prey. With every instinct screaming at her to move, she dropped to a crouch, gripping the piece of metal tighter in her hand. She needed to figure out how to survive, and fast. But there was something else in the air now, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just the creature in front of her. It was the feeling that this was all part of something much bigger. This world was not just hostile. It was alive with threats, unseen forces lurking just beneath the surface. As the creature took a step toward her, she felt a surge of determination. She had survived worse. She wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Her hand tightened around the metal, and her eyes locked on the creature in front of her. The hunt had begun. The planet's oppressive silence returned as the creature disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Her heart still raced, and her breath came in sharp gasps, but she forced herself to steady her mind. She could not afford to panic. Not now. Not when she had just begun to understand the true danger of this world. The growl echoed in her ears, the memory of those glowing yellow eyes still fresh in her mind. Her first priority was to find shelter. She had to stay hidden until she could figure out a plan. She knew the creature wasn't the only thing lurking out there. There had to be more. Something much worse. Slowly, she started moving, her eyes scanning the horizon, constantly aware of the smallest sound. Every step felt like a risk, but she had no choice. The wreckage was of no use. It was scattered too far apart and would only make her an easier target. She needed higher ground, somewhere that would give her a better view of the area. She stumbled upon a narrow path, leading up into a rocky outcrop. The terrain here was different, less barren, with patches of strange, twisted plants growing from the ground. They seemed to pulse with life, their leaves trembling as though they were breathing. She didn't dare touch them, wary of what might happen if she did. Everything in this place felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of something organic, decay, perhaps, or something more sinister. But it was her best chance for higher ground, so she pushed forward, ignoring the uneasy feeling settling in her gut. As she ascended, the distant sound of something large moving through the brush reached her ears. It was faint, but unmistakable. The growl. Again. But this time, it was accompanied by the sharp snap of branches breaking, followed by a thudding noise, as if something was moving with incredible force. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she needed information. She needed to understand what she was facing. Reaching the top of the rocky hill, she paused, crouching low behind a boulder to keep herself hidden. Below in the valley, a clearing stretched out before her. The strange gray creature she had seen earlier was there, circling around something, a large, pulsating mass on the ground. The creature's movements were slow, deliberate, and she could see the hunger in its eyes as it approached the strange object. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't a creature hunting for food. This was something more. The object in the clearing seemed to be alive, writhing and shifting, almost like a cocoon. It was a dark, sticky mass that quivered in the air, as though it could sense the creature's approach. A sudden realization hit her. The creatures weren't just predators. They were part of something much larger, something that controlled this world. A chill ran down her spine as she watched the creature pause. Its long limbs tensed, and it raised its head, sniffing the air. The growl turned into a low hiss. It was looking directly at her, sensing her presence. For a moment, their eyes locked, its yellow gaze piercing through the distance. She held her breath, not daring to move. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to flee, but she couldn't. She needed to know more. She needed to learn the secrets of this place. The creature took a step forward, then another, its body shifting with unnatural grace. But before it could make another move, the cocoon-like mass in the center of the clearing began to crack open. The shell split with a sickening sound, revealing what was inside. Her blood froze in her veins. A creature, but not like the one she had seen before. This one was massive, its body a grotesque combination of limbs, claws, and eyes. Its form seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, its skin covered in slimy tendrils that wriggled like snakes. The air around it shimmered as if reality itself was bending. The creature's eyes glowed an eerie blue, and it let out a shrill, high-pitched screech, that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The smaller creature, the one she had encountered earlier, dropped to the ground, bowing its head in submission. It wasn't a predator at all. It was part of the hierarchy, part of the monstrous ecosystem of this world. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was on a world ruled by predators, not just in a physical sense, but in every way imaginable. Everything here was connected to the creatures, to the twisted system that governed this planet. She knew then that her survival depended not just on her strength, but on her ability to adapt. She had to become part of this system, to understand it and use it to her advantage. The creatures were dangerous, but they also had weaknesses, things she could exploit. The massive creature in the clearing raised its head, its glowing eyes scanning the area. It sniffed the air, its tendrils reaching out like antennae, sensing everything around it. It had sensed her presence. She wasn't safe here. Without thinking, she turned and began to move quickly, her footsteps silent on the rocky ground. She needed to find a place to hide, a place to regroup and plan. The creatures had shown their power, and she knew she couldn't fight them head-on. Not yet. She had to become something else, something more. As she made her way through the dense brush, the weight of the situation began to sink in. She wasn't just on a foreign planet anymore. She was in a living nightmare, a world where survival meant understanding the predators, not just fighting them. She wasn't just exiled. She was part of their game now, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. The hunt had just begun. Days passed since her first encounter with the terrifying creatures of the planet. The warrior had learned the art of survival here, adapting quickly to the hostile environment. She knew the creatures' patterns, understood the strange behaviors of the flora, and used her instincts to stay one step ahead of the predators lurking in the shadows. But deep down, she could feel the pull of something more. This world was not just a prison. It was hiding something. Something ancient, something powerful. The wreckage of her ship had been nothing more than a broken skeleton, offering no real tools for survival beyond what she had already scavenged. She needed more. She had to find something, anything, that would help her escape this deadly world. There had to be a way out, but more than that, she needed answers. Why had she been exiled here? What was the real purpose behind this strange planet? And why did it seem so alive? It was on the fourth day after her close encounter with the creatures that she found it, the ruins. She had been following a winding path through dense foliage when she stumbled upon a hidden entrance nearly covered by vines and overgrown moss. The entrance was low to the ground, barely noticeable, but the moment she saw it, something deep inside her stirred. She approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore. There was a strange magnetic pull, like the planet itself was drawing her closer to this place. The entrance was carved into the side of a rocky cliff, hidden from view unless you knew where to look. As she knelt down, peeling away the vines that clung to the surface, she saw intricate symbols etched into the stone. They weren't just random markings. These symbols were deliberate, ancient, and somehow familiar. Her heart raced as she ran her fingers over them. They were not of her people. They were something else entirely. But their design resonated with her in a way she couldn't explain. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The air shifted as she crossed the threshold, cooler than the outside world, and thick with the scent of decay. The walls inside were lined with strange carvings, depictions of creatures that resembled the monsters outside, but were much larger, much more terrifying. There were images of battles, of wars fought across vast landscapes, and of people. No, not people. Beings that didn't resemble anything from her world. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies sleek and elongated, their faces expressionless. As she moved deeper into the ruins, her mind raced. This place was old. Very old. She could feel the weight of time pressing down on her as she explored. It was as if the air itself was charged with forgotten history, secrets waiting to be unearthed. The ruins were crumbling, but they still held an unsettling power. She couldn't shake the feeling that this place had been built by a civilization far more advanced than anything she had known. Then, as she ventured further into the ruins, she found what she had been searching for. In the heart of the ancient structure, there was a large chamber, its ceiling high and cracked, beams of sunlight filtering through the gaps in the stone. The floor was covered in dust, and in the center of the room lay a massive object. It was a pedestal, worn by centuries of neglect, but upon it rested an artifact that glowed faintly with an eerie blue light. It was a crystal, but not like any she had ever seen before. Its surface was smooth, its edges sharp, and its glow pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The closer she approached, the more she could feel the hum of power resonating from it. Her hand shook slightly as she reached out to touch it. As her fingers brushed the surface, a wave of energy surged through her body, and she gasped, stumbling back. The room seemed to spin, the air thickening around her as the crystal's light intensified. She could hear a low, vibrating hum in her chest, like the very heartbeat of the planet itself. Then the world went still. The vision came suddenly, overwhelming her mind. Images flashed before her eyes, visions of an ancient race, beings with long, flowing limbs, and eyes that glowed just like the creatures outside. They were once rulers of this world, wielding the power of the crystal to control life and death itself. But something had gone wrong. The creatures she had encountered, those terrifying, predatory beings, had once been servants, tools of the ancient race. But over time, they had turned on their masters, destroying them and taking control of the planet. The crystal was the key. It had the power to control the creatures, to harness their energy and bend them to one's will. The ancient race had used it to rule, but it had come with a terrible price. The crystal was not just a tool, it was a living thing, bound to the very heart of the planet. To control it was to control everything. To wield it was to be consumed by it. The vision ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving her breathless and disoriented. She stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The crystal still pulsed softly, as if waiting for her to take it, to make her choice. But she knew better now. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a weapon, a dangerous power that could destroy her just as easily as it could save her. She had a decision to make. The creatures outside were not just beasts. They were the remnants of an ancient war, living on in a never-ending cycle of death and rebirth. She couldn't stay here forever. She needed to use this power, but she had to be careful. She had to understand it. If she failed, she would become like the ancient rulers, consumed by the crystal, controlled by the very force she hoped to control. With a deep breath, she stepped back, her fingers lingering on the cool surface of the crystal for just a moment longer. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a victim on this planet. She was a player in a game much larger than she had ever imagined. And now she had the power to change the rules. The hunt had only just begun. The air around her crackled with energy, the faint hum of the crystal still resonating in her chest. It was as if the very planet had come alive, aware of her presence. The warrior took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She wasn't the same anymore. The crystal had marked her, and its power was now inside her, intertwining with her very being. She knew the dangers. The visions had shown her the catastrophic effects of wielding such power. The ancient race had been consumed by their thirst for control, and the creatures that roamed this planet had risen up against them, breaking free of the chains that once bound them. The crystal was a double-edged sword. Too much control, and it would overwhelm her. Too little, and she would be at the mercy of the very beasts she had learned to fear. But she couldn't turn back now. The planet had already shown her its darker side, and she had no choice but to play the game. Leaving the ruins behind, she ventured out into the open, her senses heightened by the new energy coursing through her veins. The world around her seemed more alive than ever, as if the very air itself was attuned to her presence. The ground beneath her feet felt more solid, the distant sounds of movement in the forest no longer an unknown threat. She could hear the creature's footsteps, feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere whenever they drew near. Her connection to the planet had deepened, and now she was a part of it. Her first test came sooner than she had expected. The distant growl of a creature echoed through the trees, low and guttural. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing as she focused on the shifting shadows between the trees. It was the smaller creature, the one she had seen earlier, the one that had bowed before the massive beast in the clearing. It was back, its elongated form creeping closer, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. But this time, something was different. The creature didn't move with the same predatory grace. It was hesitant, almost fearful. It stopped, its body stiffening, as if it sensed her presence. She could feel its unease, its instincts screaming for it to flee. The warrior took a step forward, her hand outstretched, a silent command that echoed through her mind. To her surprise, the creature froze. Its glowing eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. It wasn't just a predator anymore. It was part of the ancient hierarchy, part of the system that had once ruled this planet. And now, it was listening to her. She felt the weight of that power settle over her, and she knew that she had control. The creature slowly lowered its head, a low, almost submissive growl rumbling from deep within its chest. She held her ground, but she didn't move closer. She wasn't ready to command it completely. Not yet. She had only just begun to understand the crystal's power, and she wasn't foolish enough to think she could control everything at once. But the creature, this small, terrifying thing, was just the beginning. She could feel the pulse of the planet beneath her feet, the hum of life that had once been so foreign to her. She could feel the creatures, the ones who roamed the planet like ghosts, waiting to be called upon. It was all connected. Everything here was part of a larger system, and now she was a part of it too. As she stepped back, the creature remained still, its eyes never leaving hers. Slowly, it turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing into the thick foliage. The warrior watched it go, her mind racing. She had just tested the first step of her new power, and it had worked. But there was more to this planet than just creatures and crystal energy. There was something else, something that still eluded her grasp. Her mind drifted back to the ruins, to the artifacts that lay hidden beneath the dust of centuries. The visions had shown her the destruction that had come from wielding the crystal. The ancient rulers had been consumed by their desire for control, and the world had fallen into chaos. But there was something else, something more, deeper than just the need to dominate. The crystal, with its power to manipulate the creatures, could also heal. It could restore balance. If she learned to master it, she could change everything. She could stop the cycle of destruction, prevent the planet from devouring itself again. But that was a question for later. For now, she had to survive. She had to prepare. As she made her way back to the shelter she had found earlier, the weight of her new reality pressed down on her. The planet was alive with danger, and she had only scratched the surface of what it held. She needed to be ready for the next phase of the game, whatever it was. The crystal's power coursed through her, and she could feel the change in the air. The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was about control. And now she had the first taste of that power. Her enemies were out there, watching, waiting. But for the first time, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a queen. The war for this world had begun. The days blurred together as she honed her connection to the crystal. Every step, every breath seemed to echo with the ancient power coursing through her. She could feel it vibrating beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the responsibility it carried. The crystal was a living entity, alive with the history of the planet, its power etched into every corner of this forgotten world. The more she used it, the more she understood the price of that power. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. She had come to understand one thing. The planet itself was like a giant web, all the creatures, plants, and forces linked by an invisible thread. And now she was at the center of it. With the crystal's energy running through her, she could feel the pulse of the planet at all times. She could hear the calls of the creatures, their growls, their movements. She knew when they were near, when they were hunting. She knew where they were, and more importantly, she knew how to control them. But power like this came with its own dangers. The creatures were no longer the only thing she had to be wary of. The crystal had begun to affect her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She felt a constant pull to it, as if the crystal itself was demanding more from her. More control, more influence over the world around her. The line between her and the planet was becoming blurred, and the further she went, the more she feared losing herself in the process. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, a new danger appeared. She had been moving through the dense forest, trying to track down the pack of creatures she had been studying for the past few days. She had noticed something strange. There was an unnatural stillness to their movements, a lack of aggression. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious, but she didn't hesitate. She had learned to rely on the crystal to guide her, to tell her when danger was near. The energy within her thrummed with anticipation as she moved silently through the trees, her every step measured and deliberate. The creature she had encountered before, the one that had bowed before the massive beast, was nearby, and she could feel it. Then she saw them. A group of the creatures, larger now, their bodies thicker, more muscular. Their eyes glowed a fierce yellow, their movements deliberate. They were gathered in a clearing, their attention fixed on something in the center of the space. And that's when she saw him, a towering figure, unlike any she had ever seen before. He was a predator, but not like the others. His eyes glowed with the same yellow intensity, but there was a sharp intelligence behind them, an awareness that the others lacked. His body was adorned with scars, his muscles rippling beneath his skin, as if he had fought and survived battles beyond her comprehension. This was no ordinary creature. This was a leader, a king among the beasts. And he was waiting for her. She felt the pull of his gaze as he turned toward her, his eyes narrowing with interest. The air grew heavy with tension, and the creatures around him became still, waiting for something to happen. She knew she had to act fast. This was a challenge, one that she had not expected so soon. But she was no longer the prey. She focused, drawing the crystal's energy deep within her. It surged through her, filling her veins with power, and she reached out with her mind. The creatures flinched, their eyes darting around, unsure of what was happening. The leader, however, stood firm, his expression unreadable. Without warning, she unleashed the power within her. It was a wave of force, a shockwave of pure energy that sent the creatures scattering into the trees. But the leader stood his ground, unflinching. His eyes glowed brighter, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. This wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a battle of wills. The warrior stepped forward, the crystal pulsing with every beat of her heart. She could feel the leader's power, his command over the others. But she was different now. She wasn't just another survivor on this planet. She was the one who held the crystal, the one who could control the creatures. And she wasn't about to let this leader take her power. The two locked eyes, and the air between them thickened. The leader snarled, showing his teeth, but there was no fear in his gaze, only respect. He had recognized her power, and now, it was clear, he was challenging her for dominance. The warriors of this world didn't fight with weapons. They fought with their minds, their wills, and their connection to the planet. She had the crystal. She had control of the land, the creatures, and the very elements themselves. But this creature, this leader, had something she didn't: experience. He had been on this planet far longer than she had, and he knew the game better than she ever could. But she wasn't afraid. She knew that power alone wouldn't win this battle. It would be her mind, her connection to the crystal, that would decide the outcome. With a fierce cry, she surged forward, pushing the crystal's energy outward, directing it with all her strength. The leader moved to meet her, his massive body charging with raw power. For a moment, the world seemed to slow, their minds locked in a silent, invisible battle. She could feel his strength, but she also felt the weakness in him, the same desperation that had driven the creatures to rebellion long ago. He wasn't invincible. He was just another predator, just another part of the game. The energy she had been drawing on surged one final time, and with a force that shook the very ground, she pushed him back. The leader staggered, his knees buckling, but he didn't fall. He was strong, and the challenge wasn't over. But for the first time, she knew she had won. The leader rose slowly, a growl rumbling in his chest. But this time, it was different. He lowered his head in submission, acknowledging her dominance. The creatures around him followed suit, their once fierce eyes now filled with uncertainty. The power of the crystal had given her command, and she had proven she was worthy of it. The hunt was no longer about survival. It was about control, about mastering the forces of this planet, and she had taken the first step in becoming its queen. The world had changed, and so had she. "You said." The two locked eyes, and the air between them thickened. The leader snarled, showing his teeth, but there was no fear in his gaze, only respect. He had recognized her power, and now, it was clear, he was challenging her for dominance. The warriors of this world didn't fight with weapons. They fought with their minds, their wills, and their connection to the planet. She had the crystal. She had control of the land, the creatures, and the very elements themselves. But this creature, this leader, had something she didn't: experience. He had been on this planet far longer than she had, and he knew the game better than she ever could. But she wasn't afraid. She knew that power alone wouldn't win this battle. It would be her mind, her connection to the crystal, that would decide the outcome. With a fierce cry, she surged forward, pushing the crystal's energy outward, directing it with all her strength. The leader moved to meet her, his massive body charging with raw power. For a moment, the world seemed to slow, their minds locked in a silent, invisible battle. She could feel his strength, but she also felt the weakness in him, the same desperation that had driven the creatures to rebellion long ago. He wasn't invincible. He was just another predator, just another part of the game. The energy she had been drawing on surged one final time, and with a force that shook the very ground, she pushed him back. The leader staggered, his knees buckling, but he didn't fall. He was strong, and the challenge wasn't over. But for the first time, she knew she had won. The leader rose slowly, a growl rumbling in his chest. But this time, it was different. He lowered his head in submission, acknowledging her dominance. The creatures around him followed suit, their once fierce eyes now filled with uncertainty. The power of the crystal had given her command, and she had proven she was worthy of it. The hunt was no longer about survival. It was about control, about mastering the forces of this planet, and she had taken the first step in becoming its queen. The world had changed, and so had she. The sun had begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting a red hue over the planet. It was a beautiful sight, but the warrior didn't pause to admire it. She couldn't afford to. The energy from the crystal hummed through her, a constant reminder of the power and responsibility she now carried. She had come so far, fought so hard to survive. But survival was no longer enough. She wasn't just living on this planet anymore. She was shaping it. The leader she had defeated now stood by her side, his posture slightly bent in submission, but his respect was clear. The creatures that had once hunted her, once terrified her, now followed her every command. She had taken control of them, but it wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of something greater. The crystal's power had merged with her, and now she had the ability to bend the very fabric of this planet to her will. But even with the creatures bowing to her, there was still one question that lingered in her mind. Why had she been exiled here in the first place? What was the true reason behind her banishment to this world? She had learned much, but there were still gaps in her understanding. And she knew there was someone, or something, who held the answers. The ruins, the crystal, the strange visions, it all pointed to something larger, something more important than just surviving the beasts. This world, this planet, wasn't just a place to hide. It was a prison. And if she wanted to escape it, if she wanted to control its future, she would need to confront the true masters of the planet. The shadows lengthened as night fell, and she stood atop a ridge, looking down at the vast forest that stretched before her. It was teeming with life now, creatures of all shapes and sizes lurking in the trees and underbrush. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Control. She had tamed the planet's savage heart, and it was now under her reign. But that didn't mean she was alone. The warriors of the planet, the original rulers, had long since vanished. The ancient race who had once controlled the crystal, wielding its power to rule the world, had left behind their legacy. And now, they were stirring again. A soft hum filled the air, a sound so faint that it might have been a figment of her imagination, if not for the way the creatures around her reacted. They paused, their ears twitching, their eyes wide with alertness. The power of the crystal trembled in her chest, as if it were calling to something. She had felt it before. The pulse of the planet, the sense that there was something just beyond her reach, something ancient and powerful and waiting. This time, however, it was different. This time, the planet was not just reacting to her power, it was responding to a force even greater than the crystal. With a sudden realization, she turned and began to run, the crystal's energy surging beneath her skin as she moved. Her instincts screamed at her to hurry. She had to reach the heart of the ruins, the place where the crystal had first shown her the truth. There was no more time to wait. She had to find the source of the disturbance before it was too late. The ground beneath her trembled as she ran, the air thickening with energy. She could feel it now, growing stronger with every step. The presence that had once controlled the planet. The planet was alive, and it was awakening. When she arrived at the heart of the ruins, the chamber that had once held the crystal, she saw them. Figures, shadowy, indistinct forms, loomed in the darkness. They were tall, their forms slender and elegant, their faces obscured by a strange light. The very air seemed to bend around them, and the ground trembled with their presence. These were the rulers, the ancient race who had once wielded the crystal's power. Their eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, their gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. They were not alive in the way she was, not in the way of flesh and blood. They were something else, something beyond. "You have come," one of them spoke, its voice like 1,000 whispers, distant and cold. "You have taken the crystal. You have taken our legacy." The warrior stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've taken nothing. I've only learned what you left behind. Why was I exiled here? Why this planet?" The figure stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful, like it was gliding rather than walking. "You were not exiled, child. You were chosen. The planet chose you. You are the one who can wield its power. The crystal, it is not merely a tool. It is the heart of this world. It gives life. But it also demands a price." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "A price. The planet consumes all who seek to control it," the figure continued. "But you are different. You are the last of your kind. The crystal is attuned to you. And now you must decide. Will you rule this world and become its queen, or will you leave it behind? The planet has chosen you, but you must choose yourself." The warrior stood silent for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had come to this world as an exile, a victim. But now, she was a queen. She had power, true power, but at what cost? Could she truly control the planet, or would she become like the rulers before her, consumed by it? Her hand rested on a crystal, the power pulsing through her once more. She felt the weight of the decision pressing on her, but she also felt something else, something new. The crystal had given her power, but it had also given her freedom. She had the choice to control this world, or to leave it behind, to start anew. The figures watched her, waiting. The creatures, the beasts, all stood at the edge of the clearing, their eyes filled with anticipation. The planet had given her a gift, but it was a gift that came with consequences. In the end, the warrior knew what she had to do. She wasn't just a queen of this world. She was its protector. And as long as she held the crystal, the planet would never fall into darkness again. With a final, determined breath, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on the ancient figures. "I choose to stay," she said. "I will not be consumed. I will control this world, and I will protect it from those who would destroy it." The figures nodded, their glowing eyes fading into the shadows. The planet, too, seemed to exhale, the air around her lightening, the energy shifting. The warrior stood tall, the crystal pulsing with life beneath her fingers. She was no longer a prey, no longer an exile. She was the queen, and her reign had only just begun. The warrior stood atop the high cliffs, the first light of dawn breaking across the horizon. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the scent of the planet's wild heart. The crystal pulsed gently in her hand, its energy now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She could feel the whole world beneath her, every inch of the land, every movement of the creatures that lived within it. The planet was no longer a foreign entity. It was a part of her, and she was a part of it. But with that connection came a heavy responsibility. The ancient rulers, the ones who had once controlled the crystal, had given her the choice to rule or to leave. She had chosen to stay, to claim her place as the protector of this world. Yet, the weight of that decision was greater than she had anticipated. The creatures she had once fought, the ones who had hunted her with savage intent, were now her allies. They were still wild, still dangerous, but under her command, they had become a force to be reckoned with. The leader of the pack, the one who had once stood as her greatest challenge, now stood by her side as a loyal companion, though his fierce independence still flickered in his eyes. They respected her, feared her even, but there was an understanding between them now. She was not just a queen in title. She had earned their respect through blood and battle. But the power of the crystal was not without its temptations. As she walked through the dense forest, her eyes narrowed. She could feel its pull, urging her to use it more, to bend the world further to her will. There were moments when the desire to control everything, to shape the land and its creatures to her perfect vision, almost overwhelmed her. But each time she would pause, taking a deep breath, reminding herself of the delicate balance she had to maintain. Power was a dangerous thing, and it could easily corrupt. A rustle in the trees broke her thoughts, and she turned swiftly, her hand instinctively reaching for the crystal. A figure emerged from the shadows. A man, his face obscured by a cloak, his movements careful, deliberate. He was not one of the creatures, nor was he an inhabitant of the planet. He was an outsider, a human like her, though much older, his weathered features betraying a life lived on the edge of survival. "You've changed," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "The planet has marked you." The warrior did not lower her guard. "Who are you?" The man gave a faint smile, his eyes glinting with a mix of recognition and something else, something like regret. "I was once like you, an exile. But the crystal, it calls to all of us, eventually." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" The man took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I came to warn you. The planet, it's not just alive. It's a living weapon. It will fight back against you, against anyone who tries to control it. The crystal, it is more than just power. It is a trap. The rulers before you, they fell to it. And so will you, unless you know how to wield it properly." Her grip tightened around the crystal, the pulsing energy growing stronger. "You think I don't know what I've chosen?" The man shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't think you understand the full extent of what you've unleashed. The crystal is a beacon. There are others, from beyond the stars, who will come for it. You won't be able to stop them, not alone. For the first time, the warrior felt a flicker of doubt. She had known, deep down, that this world, this planet, was too powerful to be contained. She had felt the stirring of something greater, something far beyond the creatures she had tamed, the crystal she had claimed. She had known there were forces out there, watching, waiting. But she had never truly understood what it meant to have the crystal, what it meant to be its keeper. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The man's gaze softened. "You need to leave. You need to take the crystal and leave this planet before they come for it, before they come for you." She hesitated. Her thoughts swirled as the crystal pulsed with an almost soothing hum in her hand. The idea of leaving behind the world she had claimed, the power she had worked so hard to master, felt impossible. This was her home now. She was the queen. But the man's words echoed in her mind. "The crystal is a trap." She looked out across the land, the wild forests stretching for miles, the creatures roaming beneath her. She had learned the planet's rhythms, its language. She had become part of it. How could she walk away now? But then, the ground beneath her feet trembled. A low, rumbling sound filled the air. The creatures around her froze, their eyes flicking nervously to the sky. She could feel the planet's heartbeat, quickening, erratic. The man's voice broke through her thoughts. "They're coming." The warrior turned, her heart racing. She could feel it too, the sense that something was approaching, something far more powerful than anything she had faced before. She didn't have time to hesitate. With a deep breath, she held the crystal tightly, summoning the energy of the planet to her side. She had learned to control it, to bend it to her will. But now, it was no longer just about survival. It was about something greater. The ground shook more violently, and the sky above seemed to darken, clouds swirling ominously. The air grew thick with energy, as if the very atmosphere were alive, responding to the coming storm. "They found us," the man said, his voice grim. The warrior turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "I won't run." He shook his head, his expression filled with regret. "Then you'll die here." She didn't respond. She could feel the power of the crystal deep inside her, a burning fire, urging her to fight. She had no choice now. She was the queen, the protector of this world, and if this was her final battle, she would face it with all the strength she had. With a cry, she released the energy of the crystal, sending a shockwave rippling through the air. The ground exploded beneath her feet, and the sky seemed to crack open as the first wave of attackers descended. The final reckoning had begun. The warrior stood firm, ready to face whatever came next. Her reign had begun, but it was far from over. And she would fight, to the last breath, to protect this world she had claimed as her own.